They used to scream my name. Back in the 90s, I was the golden boy, Ben Carter. The face that launched magazine covers and made teenage girls cry just by smiling into the camera. I walked red carpets, drank champagne with Pacino, sparred on screen, with Cruise. Directors fought over me. Critics adored me. My jawline had its own fan club. Now, I just walked out of a Netflix casting room where some assistant with TikTok hair told me, "Thanks, we'll be in touch," before tossing my resume on the pile like it was damp trash. The role? A grandfather with arthritis who dies in the first episode. I didn't even get it. I'm standing outside, leaning against a graffiti-covered wall, rain soaking into my denim jacket, crushing a cigarette between my fingers like it owes me something. My hands shake, but not from the cold. This city used to feel like mine. Now it spits me out like a chewed toothpick. I hear a soft sob. Not the dramatic, made-for-TV kind. A real one. Raw. Desperate. I look to my left. She's sitting on the wet stone steps of the old theater school across the street. Maybe 22. Maybe less. Soaked to the bone. Her mascara's halfway down her cheeks. And she's got this helpless way of hugging herself like she's the only thing left to hold on to. And without thinking, maybe out of instinct, maybe out of habit, I cross the street and sit next to her. No umbrella, no plan, just two soaked ghosts in the rain. She doesn't look at me at first. I don't blame her. I probably look like someone's washed-up uncle. But then she turns her head, wipes her eyes, squints like she doesn't believe what she's seeing, then, barely a whisper, Are you Ben Carter?" I blink. "Depends. Am I being served papers?" She gives this little broken laugh, chokes on it. "Oh my God, you are. I watched Ashen Heart like 100 times. My mom loved it too. She said your eyes had sadness in them." I stare at her, stunned. "That movie came out 23 years ago. People barely remember it now." "You're the first person in 5 years to say my name without pity," I murmur. We sit there for a while. No words. Just rain and street noise and silence between two people who ran out of direction. Then I say, "You hungry?" She nods. We end up at Crimson Light. Still exists somehow. Dark red velvet walls, real candles, and Coltrane humming through the speakers. The kind of place where time slows down and reality stays outside. She orders soup. I get a steak I can't afford. We talk. Her name's Karen. From some nowhere town with a gas station, a liquor store, and one bad Chinese buffet. She came out here chasing the dream, the big one. Auditioned for the theater school this morning and flunked it hard, they said. "I was too green," she says, playing with her spoon. "Like that's something I can just fix overnight." I nod. "I got told I was too used up. So, there's that." We laugh. It's not a happy sound, but it's real. Feels like the first honest laugh I've had in years. There's something about her, not just the way she looks, though she's beautiful in that kind of fragile, tremble-at-the-edges way. It's the fire. Burnt down, but not out. Like me, I'd tell her stories. Not the glamorous ones. Everyone's heard those. I tell her about the hotel rooms with no windows, the panic attacks during fittings, the time I almost got fired for asking for one day off. She listens like it matters. She tells me she's staying in a hostel near Koreatown, 10 girls in one room, no lock on the bathroom door. "I was supposed to go home," she says, "but I can't. Not yet. If I do, it's over." I don't think. I just hear myself say it. I've got a house. Too big for one person. You can. Stay. Just until you figure things out. She looks at me like I just offered her the moon. "Are you serious?" Deadly. "You don't even know me." I take a sip of whiskey and shrug. I don't even know me anymore. Might be nice to meet someone new. The next morning, she's standing in my kitchen wearing one of my old t-shirts. Faded logo from a 1997 film no one remembers. She's holding a coffee mug like it's the Holy Grail, sunlight spilling in through the massive windows I stopped, noticing years ago. She looks content, like she belongs there, and something inside me shifts. For the first time in what feels like forever, I don't feel like a washed-up name in the credits. I don't feel like a joke or a has-been. I feel human wanted, maybe even useful. I lean against the doorframe, arms crossed. Good coffee? I ask. She smiles over her shoulder. Best I've had in a week. I smile back. And in that moment, with the smell of toast and the hum of the city waking up below us, I realize I've let something in, something that just might save me. The first few months felt like we were playing house inside a movie. A good one, directed by Nora Ephron, maybe, with golden hour lighting and soft jazz in the background. Everything felt like a punchline to a private joke only we understood. We laughed over burnt pancakes, danced in the living room to my scratched-up Sinatra records, and watched my old films with her head on my chest. She'd look up at the screen and say, "God, look at you, my James Dean with a beer belly." I'd roll my eyes and fake offense, but truth be told, I loved it. I loved her. I hadn't felt needed in years. Not since the phone calls stopped. Not since the studio head stopped inviting me to parties, or calling me kid. But Karen, she made me feel like I was still someone. Not because of who I used to be, but because of how I made her feel now. And so I married her. It wasn't flashy. No limos, no publicists, no glossy spreads and people. Just me, Karen, a few close friends, and a cheap Bluetooth speaker playing Etta James in my backyard. Jake, my best friend from back when I still mattered, officiated in a Hawaiian shirt, holding a beer and half a smile. Karen walked barefoot across the grass, eyes locked on mine. Her dress was simple, her hair a little messy from the wind, and she looked more beautiful than any woman I ever kissed on screen. We said our vows with shaky voices. I promised her presence, not perfection. She promised me patience, not pity. We exchanged rings, mine slightly too tight, and kissed under the fairy lights I never took down from a New Year's party 4 years ago. But here's the thing about fairy tales. They don't prepare you for what happens when the credits don't roll, when the cameras stop, when the applause fades and you're left standing in the middle of a quiet house, holding a cold cup of coffee and wondering what went wrong. My career didn't just stall, it flatlined. No auditions, no callbacks. The roles I did get offered were humiliating. The kind of work that makes you lie at dinner parties. A pain relief commercial they shot in a grocery store parking lot. They didn't even air it. Testing demographics said you looked too sad, my agent mumbled before switching topics. I stopped returning his calls, and I started drinking. Not in a dramatic, rock-bottom, pass-out-in-the-bathtub kind of way, more like a slow, deliberate drowning. A whiskey glass always within reach, a bottle hidden in the kitchen drawer, another in the garage, just enough to blur the disappointment, just enough to quiet the ghosts. Karen noticed, of course. She'd find half-empty bottles in the laundry room, catch me drinking straight from the freezer, but she didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She just looked sad, like she was watching someone she loved rot from the inside out. And still, she stayed. She cooked elaborate dinners I didn't eat, dragged me to the beach, tried to make me laugh, even suggested we start a podcast together. "You've got stories, Ben," she said. People would kill to hear them, but the only story I had was this one. The rise and fall of Ben Carter. It all came to a head one Thursday night. She came home late, rain in her hair, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "I picked up some new monologue books," she said, holding up a worn tote bag. "I figured if I—" "That's gonna save us now?" I snapped, cutting her off. She blinked. "What? You think acting classes are gonna fix this? Fix me?" "I never said that," she replied softly. "I just thought, no," I said louder now. "You wanted this, the Hollywood dream, the fallen star, the comeback story. That's what you saw in me. That's not fair." I stood up, my chair scraping the tile. "You married the idea of me, Karen, the myth, but you forgot to ask if the man underneath still had anything left." Her bottom lip trembled. "Don't do this, Ben." But I was already there, already falling off the edge. "You wanted fame," I spat. "And when you realized I was washed up, you started looking elsewhere. Probably already have." And before she could answer, I turned, grabbed the photo frame off the shelf, the one from our wedding where we're both laughing, and slammed it against the wall. The crash echoed through the house like a gunshot. She stared at the shattered glass for a long moment, then quietly gathered a pillow and 2 blankets from the couch. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight," she said, voice tight with pain. I didn't stop her. After that, things changed. Or maybe they'd been changing for a while and I just hadn't noticed. She still made coffee in the mornings, still hummed while doing laundry, still smiled when we passed in the hallway, but the warmth was gone. Everything felt careful. Like we were walking through a house made of paper, afraid to touch anything too hard. She enrolled in night acting classes, said she was planning to reapply to the institute next year. She'd leave just before sunset, come home after midnight. Sometimes with notes in her hands, sometimes with bruises on her knees from floor work. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself she was just chasing her dream again. But deep down, something itched at me. The distance. The quiet. The way she stopped kissing me goodbye. One night, while she was in the shower, I checked her phone, just rehearsal schedules, scene breakdowns, a group chat with classmates about stage combat and Meisner technique. Nothing suspicious. And yet, I didn't feel relief. I felt emptier, like even her honesty proved how far away she already was. That night, I lay in bed, pretending to sleep. The door creaked open around midnight. Her steps were soft, hesitant. The bathroom light flicked on. Then, the water. Then silence. And then I heard it. A muffled sob. Then another. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet. Weeping. Controlled. Buried, like she was trying not to let it spill too far. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared at the ceiling, hands clenched, my heart thudding like a broken metronome. The woman I married was crying in the next room, and I didn't know how to reach her anymore. The call came out of nowhere. I was nursing, a lukewarm coffee and staring at a blinking cursor on a blank Word document, pretending I still had something to write. The screen flashed, Nate, son. I hadn't spoken to him in, God, almost 2 years. Not since the awkward birthday dinner where he stared at me like I was some relic from a war he didn't remember fighting. After the divorce, things fractured between us. His mother never missed a chance to remind him how I'd chosen fame over family. Maybe she wasn't wrong. I let the phone ring twice before answering. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Hey, Dad." His voice was warm, softer than I remembered. "I was wondering if you're free for dinner this weekend." That alone made my heart stutter. "Dinner?" "Yeah, there's someone I want you to meet. She's kind of amazing." There was a hesitation in his voice. Not nerves, hope. I forced a smile into my voice. "Sure, sounds great." The restaurant was called The Spiral. New, trendy, with a circular layout. No walls, just elegant glass panes that framed the city like a postcard. Ambient lighting, soft jazz, waiters in black aprons moving like ghosts between tables. I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. I didn't want to sit alone, pretending not to be awkward. Nate had already grabbed a table near the window. He was laughing at something his date said. His head tilted the way it always did when he was genuinely happy, chin tucked, eyes squinting just a little. I hadn't seen that expression since he was 13. She sat with her back to me. Curly, brown hair cascading down a red dress that looked like it belonged in a film noir. She held a glass of wine in one hand, gesturing softly with the other. There was something hauntingly familiar about her silhouette. I took a few steps closer, my hands damp, and then Nate stood up, beaming. "Dad, you made it!" I reached the table. He turned toward her and said the words that detonated everything I thought I knew. "This is Karen." She turned. The world stopped. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment there was no restaurant, no music, no city outside the window, just the two of us, frozen in a scene too cruel to be fiction. Her lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no sound came. Her eyes filled with a horror I knew all too well, the realization that a secret can't survive the light. She stood abruptly, knocking her napkin to the floor, then sat down again and lowered her gaze. Nate glanced between us, oblivious. "Wait, you two, do you know each other?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My jaw clenched so tightly it felt like stone. All I could do was stare. At the woman who once wore my t-shirts in the morning. At the same woman who now sat across from my son, wearing a red dress she never wore for me. I saw everything, at once. The first time we met on the theater steps, her laughter echoing through the crimson light. The way she said "I do" with her eyes closed like she was praying, the whiskey bottles, the broken picture frame, her crying in the bathroom. At midnight, I remembered it all in perfect, painful detail. I looked at her again. She still couldn't meet my eyes. She wasn't just with someone new, she was with him, my son. I took a slow breath, steadied myself. "Excuse me," I muttered, barely audible. Nate frowned. "Dad? I just need a moment." I turned and walked out, every step heavier than the last. I didn't look back. That night, I sat at my desk staring at a blank sheet of paper for hours. Eventually, I picked up a pen, and I wrote, "Karen, I always knew you'd leave. I could feel it in the silence, in the way you avoided my gaze those last few weeks, in the long nights and the longer mornings, but I never imagined you'd leave for him. You didn't just walk away, you walked through my past to get to my blood. You were the only thing that made me feel alive after Hollywood chewed me up and spit me out. And maybe that was too much to place on you. Maybe you were drowning too and I never saw it. But to see you there, with Nate, was a wound I didn't expect to reopen. Still, I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't trust what they'd do to either of us." He looked happy, radiant even, and God help me. I want him to stay that way. So here it is. If you truly love him, then love him. Make it mean something. You've betrayed me twice now, once by leaving, and once by showing up with the one person I couldn't afford to lose again. But I won't stand in your way. Tell him whatever you need to. Just don't lie to him the way you lied to me." Then I folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and left it at her old studio. I didn't put a return address. Some wounds don't need replies. Some endings don't need closure. Only distance. I left the city without telling anyone. No dramatic goodbye, no final drink at a familiar bar. I packed a few boxes, left the keys on the counter, and drove east until the buildings disappeared and the desert swallowed the road. The house I rented near Bishop looked like it had been forgotten by time. One story, faded blue paint peeling, under the weight of 1,000 sunsets, a crooked wind chime clinking out of tune on the porch. But it was quiet, and that was all I needed. Silence became my roommate. Stillness, my routine. Most mornings I'd sit on the back steps with a mug of burnt coffee and talk to the cacti like they were old friends. "Rough night, Carl?" I'd ask the tall one with 3 arms. Me too. The desert didn't ask questions. It didn't care who I used to be. It just existed, untouched, unbothered, unafraid to be empty. I started writing again. Not screenplays, not fiction, just memories, fragments of a life that used to be loud. I called it Ashes and Echoes, the life and times of a ghost. No one read it. I didn't send it anywhere. I wasn't writing for the world anymore, just for myself. To remember who I'd been, and who I was still trying to become. It was a Thursday when the letter arrived. No return address, just my name, scrawled across the front in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Nate. I stared at it for a long time, thumb running over the edge of the envelope like it might cut me. Inside there was a photo and a single page of notebook paper. The photo stopped my breath. A baby, swaddled in a blue blanket, eyes barely open, cheeks full and pink. Someone, Nate, I assumed, was holding him with a gentleness I recognized. On the back of the photo, in block letters, Chris Benjamin Carter. "He carries your name, Dad." I sat down. Hard, like my knees forgot what they were for. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. "Dad, I don't know where to start. I know it's been a long time. Too long. I know the last time we saw each other, I hurt you in a way I still don't fully understand. I didn't know. About Karen. Not at first. She didn't tell me who you were to her. She said she'd had a complicated past, a marriage that ended badly, and she wasn't ready to talk about it. I didn't press. Maybe I should have. Maybe I wanted not to know. By the time the truth came out, it was already too late. I was in love with her. She was carrying our son. You walked away without a word that night. I've replayed it 100 times in my head. I wish I'd seen what you saw. I wish I'd stopped you. I'm sorry, Dad. Not just for that. For everything. For the distance. For letting Mom's voice speak louder than yours all those years. I hope one day you can forgive me. But even if you can't, I wanted you to know. Your grandson has your name, because I want him to grow up knowing the kind of man you are. Even if you never meet him, a part of you will live in him. I hope that brings you peace. Nate. I read the letter a dozen times, then a dozen more. There was no mention of Karen. No updates, no explanations, just silence where her name used to live. But it didn't matter. Folded the photo and slid it into the front page of my manuscript. It belonged there, between the pages of a life shaped by loss and softened by love. That night, I sat on the porch in my old rocking chair, watching the sun bleed into the mountains. The sky was a watercolor of orange and indigo, stretching out over a horizon that didn't care who I had been or what I had failed to hold on to. On my lap sat the photo of my grandson. His eyes were still closed in the picture, but I imagined them opening one day, looking out at the world with curiosity and fire. Maybe he'd grow up to be an artist, a dreamer, or just a good man who knew how to listen. Maybe he'd never know my name beyond a middle name on legal documents. Or maybe one day, Nate would show him my films, dust off the old DVDs and say, "That was your grandfather. He made people feel things." I smiled at the thought. Not a sad smile, a full one. The wind rustled the dry grass. A coyote howled in the distance. The desert wrapped itself around me like a worn blanket. I looked out at the twilight and said quietly, "Played my part." I paused, then added with a small nod, "Now, applause." And for once I didn't care if anyone was listening.